Hi, we continue today in Genesis 19 in the midst of the drama of the people of Sodom pounding on the door of the house with Lot and his daughters and the two angels on the inside, and all the inside outside oppositions here building up into one exciting scene. So we're going to pick it up here in verse 11, and we're just going to go through verse 14, which is on both sides of the chiasm here, both starting outside Lot's house, then inside Lot's house at the very center of the chiasm, and a little bit on the outside, and we'll go to this section next time. So let's pick up right here. And they struck them with blindness, the men who were at the door of the house. That comes completely out of nowhere. There's only one other time in the entire Bible where the word here used for striking people with blindness is used, and that's in 2 Kings. Let's look at that briefly for a second here. When the Arameans came down against him, Elisha prayed to the Yahweh and said, "Strike this people, please, with blindness." So he struck them with blindness as Elisha had asked. And then a couple of verses later, as they enter into Samaria, he asked Yahweh to open their eyes, and they opened their eyes. So it's a temporary blindness in that immediate context. And we have no reason to suspect that angels have the power to do that or anybody else does. In the Elisha passage we just looked at, it was Yahweh who did it. So these are Yahweh's messengers. So do they have all the power of Yahweh? Angels don't otherwise seem to have that kind of power. But in any event, here it is. And as Westerman notes, it's a standard trope in ancient text, as you can see from his note below. Threatening foes are struck with blindness at the critical moment is a very common and widespread trope. So it may be borrowed from other literature. We don't know what sources they might have had. But in any event, it shifts the story from Judges 19, where the people on the inside gave up on fighting the people on the outside, threw the concubine out the door, where she was viciously raped and she was killed, till she was killed. But here, that's not the fate of Lot or his daughters or the angels. And so they strike them with blindness, both small and great, different than young and old, as we saw in the initial scene in verse 4. The only other time we see the pair, the Quatan, the Ad Gadol in Genesis, is for the sun and the moon, the great light and the small light, one for the night and one for the day. So why the author switches from to small and great from young and old, I can't say, but it's still suggesting everybody. And the translation here has some questions about it. The New RSV has, so they were unable to find the door. But the word at issue here is only here in Exodus 7:18 in the Pentateuch. It's 19 times in the Hebrew scriptures, impatient or tired, leading Wenham to suggest the translation, they grew tired of trying to find their way in. Let's look at it briefly in Exodus 7:18, and we'll see the use there. Here's the unable. The fish in the river shall die, the river itself shall stink, and the Egyptians shall be unable to drink the water. So whether that's unable or grew tired of drinking the putrid water, we don't know. But here, it's not a matter of they can't find the door. They're just struggling around in their blindness trying to find it, and they eventually give up, which is what partially explains what happens next. Because as the men, no longer called the angels here, but now simply called the Anashim, the angels again, ask if they have anybody else, they're ordering Lot to go outside, and he won't face a crowd out there. You'll see in verse 14 he goes out, but the crowd seems to have dissipated. Where they went, we don't know. This is the next scene here in verse 12, as we see in the center of the chiasm. So they say to Lot, "Have you anyone else here?" It's an interesting phrase in the Hebrew. I won't try to break it down in detail. Is it, as my note below suggests, the search for 10 just people? Well, it might be, other than the fact that in verse 13 we're told we are about to destroy this place. So it's no longer a matter of if we find 10, the entire city will be saved. It's a matter if Lot, you can find anybody related to you and get them out in time, they'll evade the nuclear explosion that will take place over Sodom. Note how this is something similar to the Israelites leaving in the Exodus story. We just saw a reference in the Exodus. Their doorposts, of course, were covered with the blood of the lamb, the sacrificial lamb, the Passover lamb. And so the avenging angel went over them. And when the Egyptian firstborn were dead, they left, although the Egyptians quickly came after them, as you know. But here, Lot is not like the Egyptians. He's not inspired by Moses, although the Israelites are not really long inspired by Moses either, on and off. But he doesn't have anyone to inspire him exactly, and he has no further experience any more than the Egyptians, the Israelites did in Egypt. But we'll see what he does in response to this increasingly urgent call from the two men to get your people and get out. So anyone else, sons-in-law, and this is the first time we hear about the sons-in-law. It's singular here, and we saw the daughters, and they're going to appear in the next verse, but they're not living with him. So that suggests the word is implying fiance, someone about to be married to, as some suggest that Lot's response when he goes in and talks to them is a suggestion that the marriage is going to be called off. But if they were outside his house, why would he want to go to them and rescue them at all if they were waiting outside the door with the entire crowd surrounding the house? They also ask about sons, which we don't know of any Lot's sons. We obviously know he had two daughters. Would the angels really not know whether he has sons or not? We don't know what kind of knowledge they have, but no sons appear. And the two daughters that we know he has, and anyone else, and there is no one else other than his wife, who's still not been mentioned. But she will be there, as we'll see. But we never hear a word from her. Bring them out of this place. And although the key word section doesn't have, it has bring out a number of times, there are also a number of words for get up, 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 get urgent. And it's not the same word every time, so I didn't highlight it as key words. But the angel's language here is really a strong one of urgency. At the very center of the chiasm we have here, we are about to destroy this place. It's the first and last word in the verse in Hebrew, because the outcry against its people has become great before Yahweh. And we recall that it was back in 1821 that this outcry, the cry of the poor oppressed by the elite, as a standard use of that term, came to Yahweh, and he was going to come down to see whether the outcry demanded punishment and destruction. So the angels represent that response, and of course everybody, every man of the city surrounded. It's curious, it doesn't say anything about the women. Could there not have been 10 good women? Or maybe the women shouldn't have been associated with these men, or we don't know. We don't know anything about the women. But presumably for all these men, there's an equivalent number of women who may have been good, but we don't hear anything about them. So the outcry has been great, and Yahweh has sent us to destroy it. So in his last attempt to do anything for anybody but himself, Lot went out. And again, it's still the middle of the night, and we don't know how far he's going in the city to go find them. Why would they be very far from him? We don't know. To his sons-in-law, who were to marry his daughters, and now we hear literally to take his daughters, but it hasn't happened yet, is what we finally hear here. The issue of taking daughters echoes the sons of God taking daughters of women back in chapter 6 that generated the Enoch literature. And we'll also see a dark version of this in chapter 34 when Jacob's daughter Dinah is raped by the prince of the local city, Shechem. So we'll see. So he tells them, up, get out of this place, echoing the language of the angels, for Yahweh is about to destroy the city. And if you were them sitting around watching TV or whatever they're doing on an evening here, what would you think? Presumably they've been around the house, and so they've seen that. Were they struck blind as well? We simply don't know. But we hear their response. In their eyes, he seemed to be yitzhacking with them. The New Revised Standard here has jesting, but the yitzhak word in the PL is almost always has sexual connotations, as we see in these various places. But there are no sexual connotations here, so we could translate it something like he seemed to be screwing with them, or you could use the F word there if you like, which is to say it's not sexual, but it uses a crude sexual word to suggest messing around with them. And so the sons-in-law don't take it seriously for perhaps understandable reasons, depending upon whether they saw the angels and were struck with blindness, have some reason to think that Lot isn't just trying to call off the wedding or has gone crazy in the middle of the night. And that will lead us, as we'll see next time, to see the beginning of the urging out, and Lot will linger. He will be unable to easily leave this city and go anywhere else, because city life is all he knows. And if you live in a city, can you imagine walking out of the city and just trying to live somewhere else without knowing anywhere else? Maybe we can have a little more sympathy for Lot as we continue with the story next time. See you then. Bye-bye.